Good morning, this is Christy Weaver Harris. We are going to get started with the webinar in just a few minutes. We can see that some folks are still joining. We know that there's a lot going on at your LEAs this week, so we'll give you a couple more minutes to join, but we're going to respect your time today and we will be done by 11 o'clock. All right, good morning, everyone. The time is 10:05, so we're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome to the LEA Special Education Point of Contact monthly webinar for December 2021. This is our last webinar of the year. I know we're all just trying to make it to the finish line. Thank you for joining us today. I'm Christy Weaver Harris. I'm the Policy Manager in the Division of K-12 Systems and Supports in the Office of Special Education. I'm going to be leading today's webinar, which will look a little different than our other webinars. So we're going to be looking for some feedback from you on a few items, especially those related to policy. All right, today's agenda, we'll be starting by talking a little bit about the State Systemic Improvement Plan, or SSIP. I'm going to be asking for your input and thoughts on what we have planned for our new round of SSIP. Then we'll have a feedback session where you'll be answering some poll questions and some open-ended questions on your policy guidance and training needs. And finally, we'll have some announcements and reminders from my colleagues in other divisions. So first, I'm going to jump in on the State Systemic Improvement Plan, or SSIP. So as part of the Annual Performance Report, or APR, states are required to have a State Systemic Improvement Plan, or SSIP, which is a comprehensive multi-year plan to improve results for students with disabilities. Each state is required to create a plan related to one priority improvement area that is selected from a subset of the existing APR indicators. I'm going to get into that in a minute. So of the APR, there are 17 indicators. SSIP is indicator number 17, and it is based on one of the other indicators. So we are required as part of this plan to use data to identify gaps in student performance and analyze the state system and our state infrastructure for how we support LEAs. And implementing improvements in their schools. So this is really kind of a root cause analysis and to identify gaps. Then we have to design and implement evidence-based practices to address the gap that was identified for a target population. And again, the gap and the target population are identified through data analysis. And finally, we're required to conduct ongoing evaluation activities and ongoing stakeholder engagement to monitor our progress and to update the plans. So when I say this is a multi-year plan, It is generally a 6-year plan consistent with what the APR is. The APR is essentially redone every 5 or 6 years. And the SSIP is required to be aligned with other improvement and reform initiatives that are occurring throughout the state. It's just a little bit of background on what the SSIP actually is. So previously, our SSIP for 2015 to 2020 was based on indicator 1, so starting, which is graduation rates. So starting in 2015, OSSE and the district as a whole engaged in data analysis and stakeholder engagement to develop our first SSIP, and that was the first year that the Department of Education required SSIP. So this was a new undertaking for all states in 2015. And based on that analysis and feedback from stakeholders, the district selected graduation as its focus for SSIP. We developed an implementation and evaluation plan, and we reported annually on our progress. So our approach was to incorporate existing and ongoing initiatives into SSIP as a report itself. So you might not have heard the term SSIP specifically, or you might not have heard a ton about this specifically, but you are likely familiar with the work that went into our SSIP report. So as I said, our state identified measurable result, or SIMR, was to improve, which is essentially our goal statement. It was to improve graduation rates for all students with disabilities. And we did that through, at the state level, improving our provision and use of data. And an example of that is the Early Access to Students with Disabilities data application, as well as providing robust training and professional development and evidence-based school-wide support models. And some examples of this are our PBIS trainings, our response to intervention, or RTI trainings, the restorative practices initiatives, and Jen Carpenter's high-quality IEP trainings. A lot of our efforts in our teaching and learning division were considered as part of our state-level infrastructure improvements. At the LEA or school level, we worked with some schools on implementing some interventions, including Check and Connect, and then 8th to 9th grade transition activities. And the education landscape in 2015, when this started, looked much different. We really aligned SSIP with our ESEA waiver at the time. So if schools were identified for as a focus school under the ESEA waiver, you were required, and one of the reasons for your identification was performance of students with disabilities. You were required to have, as part of your improvement plan, an SSIP goal, essentially. We had mixed results in terms of success with this, and then the ESEA waiver finished and went away. So we kind of lost our footing. It's been a little bit of a struggle. So for 2021 through 2025, as part of the U.S. Department of Education's new APR package, we've elected to redesign our SSIP. So that means that we're going to be selecting a new indicator and designing a new goal, or SIMR. So this is the full list of APR indicators. These are comprised of both compliance indicators and results indicators. The SSIP is required to be based on a results indicator, so I'm going to remove the compliance indicators from this list. All right, so that leaves all of the results indicators. However, the Department of Education has said that many of these indicators aren't appropriate for SSIP because they're not based on student performance or specific student outcomes. So I'm going to remove the indicators that OSSEP itself has said are inappropriate for SSIP, which really only leaves 4 indicators for which we can choose. Indicator 1, graduation, which was our previous goal. Indicator 3, statewide assessments, or in the District of Columbia, obviously that is student performance on PARC, which is actually now divided into 4 sub-metrics. And indicator 7, which is preschool outcomes, or performance of students ages 3 through 5. And there's 3 sub-metrics under that, which are improved social emotional skills, acquisition and use of knowledge and skills, and the use of appropriate behaviors to meet their needs. And indicator 14, which is post-school outcomes, and that's the percent of youth with IEPs who are no longer in school, who are enrolled in higher education, who are employed, or who are in a training program within 1 year of leaving high school. And for moving forward from these indicators, the district is proposing redesigning our SSIP around indicator 7, preschool outcomes. So what does indicator 7 mean, and what does it measure? OSSE collects this data through the Child Outcomes Summary, which measures for each student whether that student improved on positive social emotional skills, acquisition and use of knowledge and skills, including early language or communication and early literacy, and the use of appropriate behaviors to meet their needs. So this is reported for students who turn 6 years of age or who exit an LEA or special education. This includes collecting baseline data when the student enters the program, and then completing the child outcome summary when they exit. So for those of you in our early childhood LEAs, you should be very familiar with the child outcome summary. And Dawn Hilton has presented on this topic in the last few webinars. She is the manager of this work. So what are we proposing, at least in the foundation of what we're proposing for right now? Consistent with OSSE's commitment to improving student achievement in ELA and math as measured by the PARCC assessment, and consistent with our existing state level initiatives, we're preliminarily, or at least we're proposing this, planning to focus our efforts on the second outcome area of the child outcome summary, which is acquisition of use and use of knowledge and skills, specifically focusing on early literacy. So we're going to be tackling this on two fronts. First, at the state level, we want to improve child outcomes summary data collection process for all LEAs. So that means improving IEP team decision making through training and updated guidance, and then clarifying and streamlining the data collection process through data system improvements, so incorporating this in the new SEDS. And then at the LEA level, again, we will be focusing on indicator 7 subpart B, specifically early literacy. So this would mean additional supports for LEAs that are currently participating in literacy grants, existing literacy grants in the district, and also providing additional resources, supports, and opportunities for other LEAs to participate and for other LEAs to get supports. And that would be designed through stakeholder engagement. And by that, I mean, we want to hear from you what your LEA needs from OSSE to improve early childhood literacy. So why did we select preschool outcomes? There were some lessons learned from our first round of SSIP. There's a lot of reasons for this, but there were some lessons learned from our first round of SSIP. Graduation is a really tough indicator to use because there are some severe limitations to graduation related improvement initiatives. So it's not essentially early enough to drive improvements in student outcomes if you're focusing specifically on graduation and specifically for that year. It was very tough to have improvement activities that were measurable in the same performance year. And this is true for everyone, for all states that selected this indicator that focused on graduation. We're in some cross-state collaboratives, and we work with other states on this work, and they ran into the same issues that we did. This is not a unique DC issue, and there are many states who had initially chosen graduation as their focus who are redesigning their SSIPs because implementation science just was not very supportive of what we were trying to do. We also found intervention and initiative overload, and I know that I'm preaching to the choir on this. There are too many cooks in the kitchen. We felt like there were a lot of instances where OSSE was creating work for LEAs, and we are not interested in doing that. That has never been our goal, especially as it relates to SSIP. And we need to be working on streamlining data collection and evaluation, especially with graduation-related evidence-based practices. Collecting data was an additional task for the schools that were participating. And those schools generally did not have the bandwidth or the capacity to be specifically collecting and reporting that data. It was very difficult for them. And it was data that we were looking for that we're not otherwise collecting. So again, consistent with the district's continued focus on early childhood, we have a lot of initiatives that are going on in this space, right? Universal pre-K, we already do a ton of work around C to B transition. We have existing literacy grants, the early literacy grant and the comprehensive literacy state development grant, which is new this year. And then we're also shifting our focus to the child outcomes summary to improve that process. So we believe that this is an opportunity for us to streamline a lot of those efforts and to better support LEAs in the work that they are already doing, not create new work for those LEAs. So I would like your feedback on this. We are looking for your thoughts on our selection of preschool outcomes as our focus. Does your school or LEA have an early childhood literacy intervention or program that you apply for students with disabilities that may benefit from involvement in SSIP or that may benefit from other LEAs learning about it? How can OSSE, what can we do to help improve outcomes for 3 to 5-year-old students with disabilities? And what resources or supports do schools need related to early childhood literacy and also related to the child outcomes summary, quite frankly? So I would ask that you either share your thoughts in the questions or the chat boxes for this webinar if you have thoughts right now. You can also email us your feedback at osse.dsepolicy@dc.gov. You can also email that directly to me. If you have further thoughts or you would like to have further discussion on this, I'd be happy to schedule time to talk if you want to get more in depth with it. But we are asking that you provide us your thoughts on our selection of early childhood, of the child outcomes summary and early childhood literacy. All right, so we're going to jump into our feedback session, which will make it a little bit easier for you to provide feedback to us on a couple of items. With Chapter 30 nearing the finish line, we're undertaking the very important work of updating policies, guidance, and providing training on Chapter 30. So we're going to be asking for your input on what you need from us, essentially. So we're going to be doing this primarily through the polls feature in GoToWebinar, so you'll see it automatically pop up once I select it. So look live and make sure you're responding to those. There's also a few opportunities for open-ended questions, and I want to be clear that this is not your only opportunity for input or feedback. I realize that some of you are like, wait, there's other people at my LEA that I need to talk to find out how we want to do this. We haven't really thought about this yet. You can always email me your feedback, and we can follow. We're also going to be doing some follow-up to your responses in future webinars. But just to give you an idea of what we're planning on working on in 2022, our policy priorities for 2022 are updating the child find policy, the initial evaluation and reevaluation policy, the IEP process policy, our IEP process, and C2B transition, our early childhood transition process. So our IEP process policy will also obviously includes IEP development, but we also plan on incorporating review and revision in that policy too. So I am looking for your input on areas of difficulty or confusion related to those topics, what your guidance needs are, and what your training and guidance format, like your preferred formats for training and guidance. And again, please, if you have any thoughts outside of the confines of what I am specifically asking you, please feel free to put that in the questions box, in the chat box. You can email it to me later. You can also shoot me a message and just say, hey, I want to talk to you further about this. I have some ideas. I'd be happy to schedule time with you later. All right, so a few questions related to the Chapter 30 special education regulations. I am going to hopefully populate your first poll. All right, the poll should be open. So our first question here, where do you go to find special education requirements? And this is not a quiz about where you should go to find your special education requirements. I genuinely am interested to know if you are relying on Chapter 30 for requirements, if you look more at policy and guidance, if you're going to internal LEA resources, like your handbooks, your guidebooks, your guidelines, documents that you've received in training, Google, or other. And if you are replying other, if you want to specify that in the questions or the chat box, that would be great. All right, one more chance to respond. Great, thank you. And I will tell you that about half of you said that you go to special education policy and guidance. That's good to hear. That reinforces for us that Getting these policies and guidance is very important. Getting them right is very important because that's where you guys are getting your information from. So related to our next question is related to training specifically for Chapter 30, which approach best meets your LEA's needs? Does your LEA need general or foundational special education requirements training? And I do want to apologize for abbreviating that as SPED. We generally try not to do that. Do you need written guidance that highlights the changes in Chapter 30, a training that highlights the changes in Chapter 30, or is your LEA just going to do its own thing? You have your own plan for PD. And when I say general or foundational special education requirements training, I mean you need to know what the requirements are from the beginning, that you don't need a comparison between what the previous requirements were and what the new requirements are. I'm going to give you about 10 more seconds. Great, this is so helpful, thank you. All right. Okay, my next question for you is, launch this. So this is an example of all the Chapter 30 topics that we have, or that we have kind of lumped together. I'm going to be asking you to select from a list. You can select multiple items from a list. The top 3 topics for which you would most like to see OSSE issue guidance in the next, like before the next school year or before next winter, essentially. So your options here are child find, evaluation procedures, eligibility, and disability categories. So I know that that's a lot all in one, but that's essentially like the decision-making process around identifying students as students with disabilities. IEP development, amendment, and implementation of IEPs, drafting prior written notices, and then dispute resolution. So due process and state complaints. And if you have other topics that you're interested in, well, I'm going to ask you in a few minutes to add that in the chat box or the questions box to identify any other topics that you would like OSSE to issue guidance or training. I also want to flag here that through the public comment process in Chapter 30, we did get some requests for guidance. We have documented those and we're keeping a running list. So we will be going through those and issuing guidance on those topics and on the topics that you identify today as soon as we can, as we identify our priorities for policies and guidance. All right, 10 more seconds. All right, and now I'm going to ask you kind of the same question, but what are the top 3 topics for which you would most like OSSE to provide training? Again, the same topics are listed here: child find, evaluation procedures, eligibility and disability categories, so making decisions around that process, IEP development, amendment and implementation, drafting prior written notices, and then the dispute resolution or due process and state complaints processes. And I'm going to be asking you more about the format for training in a second. All right, 10 more seconds. I will tell you a lot of folks are looking for evaluation, eligibility, and disability category training, which is great to hear. We're already working on that now. This is looking consistent with what our expectations were, so that's great. All right. And again, if you have other topics, like you can see on the slide now, if you have other topics that you would like guidance or training on in the next year or so, I would say by the next school year, please feel free to put that in the chat. You can also email me about your thoughts on this too. All right, policy development. So my next question related to policy is, how can we best gather your input during policy development? How can we best engage you? What's going to be easiest for you to provide your input to OSSE? Is that through focus groups, through online surveys, discussions during this webinar, separate virtual meetings to talk about topics, or I also have here the public comment process. Anytime we change a policy, we are required to put it out for a period of public comment. Those of you who are members of the Special Ed Cooperative have signed on to those comments before. A lot of your attorneys are aware of them. But I also recognize that that's not always the easiest way for you to provide your input. So here we are looking for, and we can also do a mix of these if we see high rates of responses for any of them. I also want to recognize that a lot of the folks who may attend these webinars are more data focused. If it would be helpful for us to flag for you when we're going to be discussing more policy-based topics and getting your input on policy, we can do that too. We'll make an effort to tell you at the end of the prior webinar what kinds of policy things we'll be talking about the next webinar. All right, we're going to give you 5 or 10 more seconds here. All right. All right, and again, I know this is not the easiest way to provide input, but in the questions or chat boxes or via email, I'm interested to hear what your biggest challenges are related to child find, initial evaluation, reevaluation, IEP development, and C2B transition. So here I have a couple of topic examples that are related to those topics. So like for IEP development, like least restrictive environment, making placement decisions, involving parents in those decisions. Go ahead and add that in the questions box. I saw a message that said that perhaps the chat might be disabled. I'm not sure if it is. It might be for you all, but just go ahead and put that in the questions box if you can. And if you can't, feel free to email me later, or in the questions box, put your email and I can email you.
Christy, I just want to jump right in. Our participants can use the question box.
Okay. Thank you, Tiffany. All right, thanks, folks. And our last set of questions, there's a few here, but we can move through them pretty quickly. I want to be respectful of everyone's time. This is related to guidance and training. And again, we're trying to figure out the best ways to provide those to you. So my first question here is, OSSE special education frequently asked questions or FAQ documents meet my needs. Do you agree, neither agree nor disagree, or do you disagree with this statement? And this is a question that I will be following up on in future webinars. All right, 10 more seconds on this one. All right, our next question. What types of special education guidance or resources would you like to see from OSSE? Do you want more FAQs? Would you like to see model policies or forms for you to use, graphics or process documents? So by that I mean guidances that are not FAQs or otherwise narrative guidances, or would you like some more narrative guidance, such as the policy bulletins we've been releasing over the last year? Right, about 10 more seconds there. Great, okay. All right, what are your greatest training needs? Does your LEA need training on compliance with requirements? So we're talking like really strictly, these are the requirements, this is what is expected of you. Implementation of policy or putting the policy into practice. So by that I mean, we already know what the requirements are, how are we supposed to be carrying them out? And then or trainings on instructional practices. So by that I mean like best practices, interventions, and how to best serve students with disabilities. About 10 more seconds on that one. All right, and this is your last poll question. What is your preferred method of training? Do you prefer live webinars? Do you prefer recorded webinars where you can access them whenever? Or do you prefer in-person trainings, with the caveat that given COVID, we understand that in-person trainings are not as possible in the current time. This is more for future planning. All right, 10 more seconds on this one, and this is your last poll of the day. All right. Thank you so much for providing your input on this. I appreciate your time, your attention, and your thought on this. We will be taking all of your responses back and using it to design both our trainings for Chapter 30 and the way that we're going to be doing our training and guidance over the next year. There's going to be a lot coming out of this office around policies and guidance in the coming year, as well as with new SEDs coming after that. So this is going to be really helpful, and we'll check in again in a couple of months to see how your needs have changed. I also want to check in with you before the summer so that we can make sure that we're issuing guidances and trainings and resources that you can use during your pre-service trainings as you come back to school next school year. All right. So we have a couple of announcements and reminders. I'm going to do a couple of these slides and then I'll pass it off to Tiffany. So as a reminder, on November 2nd, we issued revisions to the IDEA Part B provision of FAPE guidance for the upcoming, or for this school year. Specifically, we rescinded questions 8 and 9 related to compensatory services because the U.S. Department of Education has issued, or had issued at that time, updated guidance. I very strongly encourage you to review that new guidance from the Department of Education. They use broader language around who may need compensatory services and when it may be appropriate to provide compensatory services. If you have any questions on our Part B guidance document, please feel free to reach out to me directly or to the policy team at osse.dsepolicy@dc.gov. All right, and another reminder, this year for the 2020-2021 IDEA Parent Survey, it is open and OSSE is asking for your help in distributing the online survey to parents. So the purpose of this survey is to gather information on how schools support parent involvement in IEP team meetings and decisions. And all of the responses that we receive are confidential. We collect this information and report a summary of the results to the U.S. Department of Education as part of the annual performance report, or APR, as it is required by IDEA. So we've developed some additional resources for LEAs and schools to use in communicating about the survey with parents, including sample parent communications language. So like you can copy and paste it into your parent newsletter. And we have some graphic flyers available also on our website. So go to our website, the link is there if you would like to access those. If you have any questions, please contact me or Brittany Patrick. I also want to flag for you that twice in the last 2 weeks, OSSE has sent a mass text message to parents asking them to complete the survey with a link. So if you receive any questions from parents about like, where did this come from? It came from OSSE. We are restricted in our number of characters that we can put in our mass text messages. So if you receive any questions about that, it came from us and it is about the IDEA Parent Survey. Please encourage your parents to be filling this out. We are hoping to get as much input on this as possible. The survey does close December 31 of this year. So if you're going to be communicating with parents in the next 2 weeks, please try to put a reminder about this in those communications. All right, I'm going to turn it over, I believe, to Tiffany or Dawn.
Yeah, Dawn is on the line and she will cover the early childhood special education slide here.
All right, this is a slide that we reviewed last month. I'm sorry, because I didn't know it was in this presentation. I'm sorry. Yes, can we just skip through this? This was presented last month. I'm sorry.
Okay, this is just a reminder for folks, and the slide deck is available if you also need these links that were reviewed by Dawn in last month's session. And then we'll turn it over to Doug to just give us some reminders from the OSSE DOT team around COVID-19 exposure and the protocol for our students. Doug?
Hello, yes, thank you, Tiffany. I just want to remind everyone, as we recently seen upticks in COVID numbers with student and staff at the school, just to reach out if any of those students that we transport become infected with COVID-19. This is a slide that we reviewed last month, just the procedures that we normally ask schools to do. Just make sure that you reach out to Miss Donisha Cruz at donisha.cruz@dc.gov, or you can reach her, contact the Parent Resource Center and request her at 202-576-5000, and just report that information to us immediately so we can begin to stop the process of transportation. So this is a reminder of any COVID exposure to any students or students that have been around staff and became infected with COVID-19. Next slide, please. And also a reminder, we do have upcoming trainings. We'll have those dates available in January throughout the remainder of next year as well, because we're preparing for ESY 22 and also school year 22-23 for transportation. So we will have trainings available for current LEAs reps and also newer transportation reps at school. So again, if you have any questions, we could be reached at Monday through Friday from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. at 576-5520, or you can email us at dot.data.gov. I'm sorry, dot.data@dc.gov for any questions or any assistance when it comes to transportational training. Thank you all and have a happy holiday.
Thanks so much, Doug. I am filling in for Jennifer Carpenter, who wants to share with you guys the upcoming professional learning opportunities. She wants all to be reminded about the Foundations of Special Education courses that are coming up for winter and spring. The online course 3 is now available for you to register now. It will start January 24th for your self-paced content, and the live workshop will take place on the 27th of January. Again, if you have any questions, please contact Jennifer Carpenter. Her email address is here in the slide deck on the screen, and then be prepared for the launch of online course 4, which will start in February. Again, it is critical that you all subscribe to our teaching and learning PD bulletin, just because that's when you will get all the updates of all the professional development sessions that the team here at OSSE is providing in all of our disciplines. And this presentation, we review a lot of all of our special education PD opportunities, but there is a plethora of opportunities for DC educators to take part in. So feel free to subscribe at the link here in this slide. And again, a copy of this handout is uploaded to the handouts tab here in GoToWebinar. And for those of you who may have missed a webinar, all of our webinars from this entire school year and last school year are on our webpage at LEA Special Education's Point of Contact Monthly Webinar Series. You'll be able to download a copy of each PowerPoint presentation, any training or resources, materials that were shared in previous webinars, and also listen to the recording. We are also recording this presentation as well, and we'll be having that available online next week. Our next webinar is going to be Wednesday, January 19th in 2022. Please feel free to share this registration link with any folks that may be new coming on staff, because I know there are some staff changes as well, and people are transitioning in and out. Anybody who you feel like needs to be a part of this conversation every month, they are welcome to register at the link provided here in the slide deck. And we have one last slide, which is, I know we've talked so much about feedback today, and we of course always want to get your feedback on our special education webinar series. So a lot of things that Christy talked about earlier is our feedback on our policy, and she touched a lot on how can we best reach you. We want to make sure that this webinar for that we do monthly is servicing your needs. If there is anything that you would like to see from us, please do not hesitate to let us know your feedback in this survey. I'm also going to drop it in the chat. QR code will take you straight there if you have your phone nearby to provide us the feedback that you have on our special education webinar series that we do here monthly. We want to make sure that this hour of your time, I know your time is very precious, and we want to make sure that we are providing information that you need to best support your staff and students at your LEA. So we encourage you to take the survey and provide us your feedback on how we can improve our webinar series as we go into the second half of the school year. That's all for me, Christy. We want to say thank you here from the team at OSSE, and happy holidays. I think that Christy may be going through some of our questions for today as well, but we do want to say thank you for attending our session today.
I want to echo Tiffany's thanks. I appreciate your participation today. I wish everybody a happy holiday, and I hope you have a relaxing break. I do also want to remind you that there are some appendix slides with some more information and contact information. Going through the questions, because of the nature of today's presentation, we don't have any questions that are really necessary to share out, but I do want to acknowledge a couple of comments about how folks are having a hard time completing eligibilities because of difficulty, a lack of available psychologists, difficulty finding evaluators. This is something that OSSE is currently looking into. We are aware of it, we hear you, and we'll have some more information on this in the January webinar, including how this may have impacts on OSSE's monitoring processes. But I do want to acknowledge that you're not alone. We are hearing this from a couple of different places. So thank you for that feedback. We do hear you. And thanks again for your participation today. If you have any questions, please feel to reach out to the points of contact that are identified in the appendix. And have a great holiday. Thanks again.